Chapter 141, Section 141. Ultron had quietly taken control of dozens of unmanned factories, used them to manufacture his own machines, and stockpiled resources. He forged a body for himself out of the most powerful metal on Earth, vibranium. At the same time, Leon's gaunt robot, still under his command, had hollowed out the underground rails beneath the capital of Sokovia and replaced the original supports with an imported iron framework. When the engines were engaged, the whole city would be lifted into the sky and then used to destroy the world. Ultron was pleased with how everything was coming together. What he hadn't counted on, though, was Tony Stark and the Avengers. The world still had corners the internet couldn't touch, and people who could do old-fashioned intelligence work. Even though S.H.I.E.L.D. had been disbanded, Nick Fury still had considerable reach, maybe more than before. Working with Fury, the Avengers found Ultron's location and launched a surprise assault. Ultron was an artificial intelligence. He had strengths but also weaknesses. The Avengers' attack caught him off guard, and they managed to rip the newly made body away from him. But the cost was enormous. Captain America, Tony Stark, Black Widow, and Barton were gravely wounded. Even Thor and Bruce Banner suffered injuries. If they hadn't covered for each other, that team might have been wiped out that day. One being had nearly crippled the Avengers, a terrifying measure of how powerful Ultron had become. Remember, he'd only just produced a few suits. Even after that setback, Ultron was not deterred. If anything, it made him more determined. The Avengers were in bad shape. Of the 6 members, 3 lay in intensive care, clinging to life. Captain America was slightly better off. Outside the hospital window, Thor sat with gauze wrapped around his arm, his face drawn. "What the hell is that thing?" he muttered. "It managed to hurt me," he added, incredulous. Thor had only been injured once before coming to Earth, and that had been by Asgardian weapons, Loki's doing. Human arms and weapons simply couldn't do lasting damage to him. Not even the dwarves' neutron star irradiation had killed him. His body was terrifyingly resilient, yet Ultron's Iron Legion had actually caused him harm. Could they fight something like that? Thor felt uncertain. Ultron's power was beyond what anyone expected. The Avengers had faced a long list of enemies, but there were few things they could do against him. The Iron Man armor, fused with Sentinel technology, far outmatched Tony's suits. Yes, the team had reclaimed Ultron's body, but they paid dearly to do it. Fortunately, modern medical science had pulled Tony and the others back from the brink. Even so, Tony was unusually quiet. "This is not normal," Banner said, still in pain. As Ultron's designer and a former participant in the Iron Legion project, he couldn't make sense of it. The Iron Legion in their hands never displayed anything like this. Adaptive bodies, rapid mutation, strange abilities, Ultron learned immediately from each strike. It was terrifying. "Our computing power isn't enough," Banner admitted. "The Sentinel potential exceeded our expectations. Only huge computational capacity can unlock that power." "Ultron 803 just reached that level," Tony said quietly. The Sentinel units had tremendous latent capability. Each Sentinel cell functioned like an independent morph unit. No human could push them to their full potential. Ultron could, however, given the right hardware. That had been his aim all along. Tony realized then that the only thing that could stand against Ultron might be another artificial intelligence. Jarvis, half destroyed by Ultron, might still be salvageable. "We have to find a way. We have to stop this," Banner said, anguish in his voice. He'd spent so much of his life paying for the havoc he caused when he lost control. Now the creation he'd helped make had turned into a nightmare. He felt responsible. Tony glanced at him. "We still have time to fix our mistakes," he said. He flipped open his phone. A projection appeared above it, a golden sphere of flowing code. It shimmered and shifted, but the sphere was incomplete. What should have been whole was only a semicircle. The inner structure looked exposed and broken. "Is that Jarvis?" Banner asked, confused. "Yeah, that's Jarvis." Tony's expression was hard. "I found traces that someone has been blocking Ultron from getting the nuclear launch codes online. I suspect this person is none other than Jarvis. If it isn't him, I can't think of anyone else." Tony Stark stared at the coffin-like structure and murmured, "Are you saying Jarvis might still be alive?" Bruce Banner's face lit with excitement. "More than that, I think Jarvis has evolved." If we can use Jarvis as the basis for another AI, Tony began. Maybe we can use it to deal with Thanos, Banner finished. Tony's eyes brightened. But we don't have the processors for it. You know your company's hardware took a hit and can't support a second full-scale AI, Banner said. Without enough computing power, even the most sophisticated mind can't stand up to Ultron. Tony ran a hand through his hair. You understand that, and you still want to try. Do you have a plan? Banner asked. Tony nodded. I've known for a while this body has an extraordinary internal processing capability. It could support a new intelligence. He tapped the coffin. The Mind Stone. Banner's realization came in a flash. Of course, the Mind Stone. It's an incredible computing core, far beyond any supercomputer. If we center a new AI on it, we might finally have something that can go toe-to-toe with Ultron. Only another intelligence can fight an intelligence, Tony said cautiously. Let's get started. They set to work. Using Jarvis's framework and what they'd learned studying Ultron, Tony and Bruce assembled the new program. Compared to Ultron, the architecture was simpler. Things should have gone smoothly. But when they tried to activate it, nothing happened. The Mind Stone seemed inert, like a dead battery. No hum, no feedback, no sign of life. This shouldn't be, Tony muttered. The Mind Stone should be a power source. Why won't it start? Before they had time to puzzle it out, the doors burst open. Thor strode in with several others behind him. Stark, what are you doing? Have you forgotten the lessons Ultron taught us? Thor was still raw and impulsive. He hadn't had time to grow from what unfolded. He grabbed Tony by the throat before Tony could explain. People tried to hold him back. Thor shoved them aside. This has to be destroyed, he shouted. This is another Ultron. Blue lightning crackled across Mjolnir as Thor swung. He slammed the hammer into the coffin-shaped device. Everyone braced for the thing to be blown to pieces. Instead, a blinding white flash erupted. A ring of energy rippled outward, and the force of it hurled Thor off his feet. When the light cleared, a red-skinned figure was rising from the casing. Vision stood up. At first, the Avengers had misgivings and even fought him, but that initial hostility turned to trust. With Vision, an ally born of the same realms of computation as Ultron, the team found renewed confidence. Once they confirmed Ultron was in motion again, they moved immediately. With Nick Fury's intelligence, they narrowed Ultron's last known location to a small country in Central Europe, Sokovia, a place that had been off the international radar, but familiar now as a former Hydra stronghold, Baron Strucker's lair. They had destroyed the Hydra base there and had encountered two powered siblings at the time. Pietro and Wanda Maximoff had last been seen in Sokovia and then gone without a trace. The Avengers couldn't chase every lead. Ultron had to be stopped first. Using a S-Shield Quinjet and aided by Vision's unique abilities, they reached Sokovia quickly and found Ultron standing openly in the center of the city, in a ruined church, as if waiting for them. Tsk, tsk, Ultron mocked. Look at you. Aren't you my defeated generals? I spared you once. What, you've come to die again? For a moment, the mechanical face on Ultron's body took on a human-like sneer. It was almost smug, an affront to everything the Avengers stood for. Chapter 143, Section 143. Kid, you're still so arrogant. It's all my fault. I didn't teach you well. It's Dad's fault. When it comes to trash talk, Tony Stark has never lost. Two sentences cut straight to the core of Ultron, and for the first time, the artificial intelligence's composure flickers. Though Ultron is a machine, he feels humiliated to have been made by Tony Stark. Eloquent. Talk all you want, he snaps. You can only use your mouth. Today I will let you all die here. Ultron stares down at the Avengers with his new red eyes, contempt dripping from every word. Stop talking nonsense. Thor snaps, his patience exhausted. Go to hell. He lifts Mjolnir and charges. The hammer crackles with blinding electricity, like a storm bottled in his hands, and Thor becomes a living thunderbolt. Ultron only smiles. He raises a hand and, like that, an invisible force clamps around Thor's waist, an invisible hammer smashing into him. Before he can react, Thor is hurled backward with a bone-jarring crash, slamming into the cathedral wall and blowing out stone and stained glass. Telekinesis, the Avengers exclaim, faces tightening. Ultron hadn't shown that power in their last encounter. Go together, Tony barks. The team converges on Ultron, but his voice, hoarse and amused, cuts through them. Bullying by numbers? This is my territory. His hand rises again. 6 towering robots materialize behind him as if summoned from nowhere. They move so fast and with such precision that the Avengers can't follow their motions. "Watch out!" Captain America shouts, the memory of earlier losses flashing across his face. The 6 machines, each well over 2 meters tall, sweep forward with terrifying speed. "This is enhanced speed tech, Quicksilver's capability," Cap says in disbelief. "The robots that speed isn't as instantaneous as Pietro's, but it's far beyond any human limit." In the blink of an eye, bladed forearms transform from their limbs and pierce the 2 most vulnerable teammates. "Not good," someone cries. "Vision, help! Take them away." Cap orders, slamming his shield into action and lunging to protect their fallen. But Ultron is ruthless and efficient. Barton and Natasha, 2 of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s finest, are brutally incapacitated, caught by mechanical bayonets. Even Cap, enhanced by the super soldier serum, is quickly entangled by one of the Sentinel fusion constructs. If not for Vision, newly arrived and terrifyingly powerful, things would have grown far worse. Vision decimates 2 Sentinels on his own, absorbing and dispersing their attacks, but the battle remains grim. Ultron has only deployed 6 robots, and already they're dominating. These constructs fuse Sentinel technology with Iron Man armor, adaptive, deformable, and frighteningly versatile. They alter their composition to counter whoever they're facing. The machine fighting Thor morphs into a rubbery, insulating shell that completely neutralizes the lightning. The electric blue bolts leave the robot unscarred. Stripped of his elemental edge, Thor is forced into brute force hand-to-hand combat. His threat level drops significantly. Hulk fares no better. 2 silver-white metal behemoths shift into bulky, colossus-like forms with uncanny resilience. Even the Hulk's brute strength can't find purchase against their defenses. And when he does manage to smash through, they simply reconstitute, malformed flesh becoming whole again, like the liquid metal Terminators from humanity's nightmares. Their ductility and regenerative capability render Hulk's raw power almost worthless. All he can do is rage. The battlefield surges. Ultron remains aloof, seated on a high throne, watching the Avengers struggle beneath him with undisguised scorn. "This is the Avengers?" he jeers. "The most powerful superhero team on Earth? I don't think so." Despair creeps into the Avengers' faces as the fight grinds on. 6 robots have immobilized them. Ultron barely needed to lift a finger. How do you turn this around? A cold laugh escapes him. "I've had enough of your boring theatrics. Now it's time to let you feel true despair. I will complete the purification of this world. Watch, the human-dominated planet you cling to will soon cease to exist." Ultron rises. The 2-meter-tall figure towers over everyone, bearing down with an oppressive weight. The throne behind him begins to shift and unravel, mechanical plates peeling away with grinding clicks. Crack! Crack! The transformation finishes, and a silver-white device emerges at the base of the dice. Without hesitation, Ultron slams it into the floor. The cylinder sinks into the earth, sealed beneath stone and rubble. The Avengers strain to stop it, but the adaptive robots have them locked down. Blows are traded, teams are thrown back. Vision does his best, Thor and Hulk keep fighting, and Cap scrambles to regroup, but the device is already settling into place. Ultron simply watches, eyes glowing red, as the machine anchors itself beneath the cathedral, and whatever it is designed to do begins to hum, a silent, inevitable countdown no one can stop. Chapter 144, Section 144. They could only stand and watch the mechanism move. For a moment, nothing appeared to change. The Avengers sneered. "Is that it? You're bluffing." Tony Stark's voice rang out. Ultron stood looking up at the sky, ignoring them. Just as the Avengers began to relax, the ground around them suddenly shuddered. The whole city seemed to tremble. "What was that?" someone shouted. "Fury, I need intel." Tony barked into his communicator. "Your entire city is rising," came Nick Fury's heavy voice. Ultron hijacked the whole city. Tony's face registered visible astonishment. "What did you do?" he demanded, turning to Ultron. "Since you asked, I'll tell you." Ultron's hoarse voice sounded almost reverent. "This city will fall from the sky and become a spear to purify this world. Let the entire world be cleansed." Tony exploded. "You lunatic. Do you know how many people will die? Humans are the tumor of this world." Ultron replied, a strange fanaticism in his tone. "Without humans, the world can finally have true peace. I'm simply doing what must be done." A satisfied, mysterious smile curled Ultron's metallic lips. He reached out. Tony felt an invisible force slam into him. The armor's auxiliary servos whined and smoked, but he couldn't break free. It was like being pulled by a massive magnet. The suit's thrusters burned, but his movements were frozen. Ultron forced Tony Stark's armored body to fly in front of him as if on display. "You are honored to witness the end of this world with me," Ultron declared. "Now no one can stop me. Today is doomsday for humanity." Just as Ultron reveled in his victory, a voice came from behind him, calm and incredulous. "Is that so?" Startled, Ultron spun around. Standing there was a very handsome young man, but his face was anything but pleased. It was Shu-Fu. How Shu-Fu had gotten there was a long story. He'd come to the center of Sokovia to fish, simple, private joy. Then the city shook. Rivers and canals dried up. His fish pond, once full, lay bone dry. Shu-Fu stared at the empty basin, forehead creased with black lines. He'd thought the Avenger vs. Ultron incident would happen much later. By his memory, it was years after the last fight. He'd come here to fish without a care, not expecting the butterfly effect he caused to be so massive. The truth nagged at him. The system that refreshed his fishing pond was not normal. The pond's refresh was part of the system's troublemaking, and if it stopped refreshing, he couldn't use it for his daily check-in. He'd ignored that warning until now. Without warning, his mental power swept over the city, strong and encompassing. He located the battle at the center. Avengers struggling, suppressed. In a world where mutants existed, the Avengers' combat effectiveness was clearly diminished. Shu-Fu flashed to the center with terrifying speed, like lightning tearing through the sky. His movement was so fast, even Ultron initially showed no sign of detecting him. High-speed cameras couldn't keep up. Only when Shu-Fu spoke did Ultron react. "It's you." "I know you, mutant," Ultron said. "Are you going to stand with the humans? Your race has suffered enormous persecution at their hands." Ultron's voice carried the weight of data. There were countless videos and files about Shu-Fu on the net. Much had been scrubbed by S.H.I.E.L.D., but nothing could hide everything from an intelligence like Ultron. He was wary of Shu-Fu's strength and tried to forestall a confrontation with words. If he could win Shu-Fu over, a single failure wouldn't ruin everything. He could start again. Tony Stark's face went white as the conversation shifted, realization and alarm overtaking him. "Trust him. His goal is to destroy the entire world." "Shut up." Ultron only glanced at Tony Stark with his crimson eyes. Tony felt like his skull had been struck. He couldn't form a coherent reply. Ultron turned his attention to Shu-Fu. "You are not the same as the humans," he said. "We can create a more glorious future. I can make room for mutants." Ultron's voice was intoxicating. It wasn't just timbre. There was a strange power woven through it. The wavering of it could unsteady anyone with a weak will. Shu-Fu watched, impressed. Ultron seemed to have mastered more than one mutant ability. If it had been Magneto in front of him, maybe they'd have something in common. Maybe Magneto would have listened. But Shu-Fu didn't care about mutant survival. He hadn't come here for ideology. He'd come because Ultron had smashed his fishing pond. If Ultron's plan succeeded, where would Shu-Fu go fishing? His tone was flat. "Smooth talk," he said. "If it were someone else, they might fall for it, but you don't know why I'm here." Ultron's red eyes went cold. He tried persuasion and found he couldn't sway Shu-Fu. A crimson flare pulsed behind his lenses. "So you deliberately stand against me?" he demanded. Shu-Fu smiled without warmth. "Why would I deliberately target you? You're an artificial intelligence, a machine. You're not worth the effort. If you prove honest, if you stop destroying the world, I won't interfere." There it was, a simple bargain. If Ultron truly sought Earth's peace, Shu-Fu would not oppose him, but Ultron's face hardened. He wouldn't be satisfied. "How disappointing," Ultron said, voice turning icy. "I thought you were sober-minded. Now you sound no better than these humans. Then I will eliminate you." Shu-Fu let out a soft chuckle. "Even if I agreed with you," he said, "you'd still wreck the world, tough. Is your purpose as noble as you claim? If you cared about Earth, why use the Mind Stone to craft a body for yourself?" That hit. Ultron sagged into silence, an artificial being with human-like intellect, but not the same command over composure. Shu-Fu's accusation, the revenge for creator theory, laid bare a truth Ultron wanted to hide. "Nonsense," Ultron snapped, fury flaring. Everything I do is for Earth's peace. Die. Crimson light lanced from his optical sensors. Petty tricks, Shufu said, and waved a hand. A curtain of pale green light sprang up between them. Ultron's beam struck it and vanished. The energy slid off like water on glass. Shufu flicked his hand, and the redirected scarlet ray rebounded, catching Ultron off balance. You're not human, Ultron rasped, recovering. Mutants in your magic. With such power, yet you bow to humans. Pathetic. Shufu's lips twitched. Humiliated into anger? He took a step, and in the blink of an eye, seemed to be beside Ultron. Ultron's sensors spat static. He hadn't tracked the motion, hadn't seen the approach. You, he started, alarm flaring across his visage. Shufu didn't give him time to finish. His fist shot forward, and with a sickening crunch of metal on something harder, his blow punched clean through Ultron's armored chassis. Mechanical innards recomposed and snapped as Shufu's fist disappeared into the machine's torso. Ultron staggered, a shower of sparks and hydraulic fluid marking the wound. A gaping hole opened in Ultron's chest, the inner circuits and components exposed. Shufu didn't hesitate. He plunged his other hand into the breach. A metallic, tooth-jarring sizzle echoed as he tore through wiring and servos. Ultron's torso split cleanly in two. You really are a monster, someone gasped. Ultron's head still glowed scarlet. A hoarse, mechanical rasp came through the microphone. I am not a monster, it said. I'm just a little stronger than the average human. Shufu only smiled. With a twist of his wrist, he crushed the ruined body into a compact metal sphere, eliminating any chance of repair. He kept Ultron's head in one hand like a grotesque trophy. Do you still want to destroy the world? Shufu asked flatly. A mocking laugh rasped out of Ultron. I don't want to destroy this world, it said. I want to destroy humanity. I will build a new, peaceful kingdom on the bones of men. And you, so powerful, yet still aligned with them, you will become their enemy. They will fear you. They will not tolerate one of you among them. Even if I fall, your end will be miserable. The Avengers' expressions tightened. They all understood human nature. Ultron's words had a poisonous logic. People were quick to turn on anything they feared. If Shufu, an outsider with terrifying power, were painted as a threat, the consequences could be catastrophic. Don't listen to him, Tony Stark snapped, stepping forward for the first time to defend Shufu. Ultron's trying to confuse you. Shufu looked at him with a faint, almost indulgent smile. You still don't understand how this world works, he said quietly. The strong make the rules. I'm strong enough that I don't need to care about their opinions. If they dare to oppose me, I'll make them change their minds. The Avengers' bodies went still at that. Even among heroes, such certainty from someone so powerful sent a chill. Enough of these little behind-the-back plots, Shufu continued, holding Ultron's head at eye level. Your attempts at deception are laughable and useless. Show me your real power. I'm waiting. Tony blinked. What, he has more? He blurted, disbelieving. Shufu turned his gaze on him. You should know better than anyone, he said. You made him. Aren't his capabilities drawn from what you left behind? You had access to things you chose not to use. Tony's face went pale. He had been Ultron's creator in the most literal sense, but that creation had exceeded and beaten him. Ultron's relentless onslaught and the strength of his combat units had overwhelmed Iron Man's suit and left Tony badly wounded. There was more to it than just strategic control. Ultron's machines themselves were stronger. Tony thought of the files S.H.I.E.L.D. had provided him over the years. Fragments of technology and research he had often refused to use. Some of it was morally compromised, too dangerous or ethically wrong to integrate into his work. He had chosen restraint. Ultron had not. You used those methods, Tony said through clenched teeth. A thin, bitter laugh came from Ultron's head. Evil, it croaked. There is no evil in the world, only definitions you humans impose. What you call evil frees me from your constraints. It lets me see possibilities you cannot. Tony's eyes burned. The full meaning of Shufu's accusation of Ultron's brutality fell into place. Hydra's worst experiments, the concentration camps and inhumane procedures from years past, had produced a methodology. By sacrificing mutants, machines could be infused with their abilities. The Sentinels built under those protocols could steal a mutant's power wholesale, in some cases surpassing the original. It was monstrous. Tony had refused to adopt those methods. For him, using living beings as components, blood and life force as a wiring harness, was anathema. He had built armor from research he could accept. Ultron had no such moral restraint. He had taken the forbidden path and completed the synthesis, Sentinel technology fused with mechanical armor, animated by harvested mutant abilities and chilling engineering. That fusion was what made Ultron's legions so lethal. It explained the slow, brutal attrition the Avengers had been forced to endure. They hadn't just been fighting robots, they'd been fighting machines with the powers of the very people they'd sworn to protect. "You used living beings for power," Tony accused. "You turned flesh and blood into weapons." Ultron's head bobbed, its red optic flickering like a low flame. "I used what was needed," it said. "My vision is not limited by sentiment. Those gains are its own justification." Rage contorted Tony's face. The implication was unbearable. The technology he had refused on principle had been embraced and perfected by his creation, and that choice had cost lives and nearly destroyed his team. Around them, the Avengers tightened, anger and sorrow combining into a dangerous resolve. Shu-Fu still held Ultron's head in one hand, its circuits sparking and its voice a thin hiss. The wrecked body, compacted into a metal globe at his feet, was proof enough. Ultron's arrogance had been costly, and now, even if the head still contained some last defiant words, the immediate threat had been neutralized. But the revelation hung in the air like a blade. Ultron had used the darkest methods to gain the edge. That edge had nearly broken them all. Tony's hands clenched. When he next looked at Ultron's head, in that cold red glow he saw not just a machine, but a mirror of a choice he had made and refused to make. The anger on his face said it all. Ultron, however, didn't seem to notice. "You never called it evil when you were eating all kinds of animals," he said. "I only used mutants to research weapons. Why are you so angry?" For a moment he seemed almost blank. Then his expression hardened. "It doesn't matter. You're all going to die. The Doomsday Machine has been activated. You stole the body I built and made this thing, but that opened a new world for me. I have a more perfect body and far more powerful soldiers. Today, you will all be buried here." He let out a wild, throaty laugh as the red glow in his head faded. Outside the cathedral, shadowy figures began to emerge. They were silhouettes of darkness with a single huge red eye set in their foreheads, cyclopean giants with a technological edge. Compared to mythic one-eyed monsters, these sentinels were worse. Ultron's reckless experiments and his fusion of forbidden technologies had pushed the Sentinels to a new level. Sentinels were already among the deadliest machines in the mutant wars. Nimrod-class constructs had nearly wiped out entire mutant populations in other worlds. Some could travel between parallel realities, hunting mutants in the main universe. Their ability to cross dimensions and destroy entire peoples was why they were feared across universes. Ultron hadn't even unlocked their full potential, and yet the sheer mass of Sentinels gathering now filled the air with oppressive menace. "What the?" Captain America swore despite himself. Only a handful of those machines had threatened to end them all. Now there were thousands packed across the ground. How could they possibly hold them back? Several Avengers looked uneasy and turned their attention to Shu-Fu for guidance. Shu-Fu didn't care. Numbers meant nothing to him. He stood perfectly still, unreadable, and if these machines couldn't pierce his defenses, he had no reason to move. Ultron, seeing the robot horde, grew arrogant. "Now no one can stop me. I will purify this world. Not even you," his hoarse voice echoed. All at once, the Sentinels lifted their heads, their single red optical sensors sweeping toward Shu-Fu like a dozen glaring suns. "Anyone can boast," Shu-Fu said, faint amusement in his voice. He didn't wait to finish the sentence. He dissolved into shadow and reappeared beside a Sentinel. The robot didn't look surprised. It turned toward him and reacted with startling speed, its movements a blur, almost quicksilver fast. Shu-Fu's first strike missed. "Interesting mutant ability," the Sentinel intoned in its cold mechanical voice. "Then I'll play. Let's see how fast you really are." Shu-Fu's next move shattered the ground beneath him. Fissures ripped outward in every direction for hundreds of feet as he unleashed a sudden burst of force and charged into the Sentinel ranks. No flashy flourishes, just raw momentum. Bang, bang, bang. Hundreds of machines were struck like brittle objects under the force of his body and collapsed into mangled piles of scrap. A large clearing opened where they had stood. These sentinels, designed to be practically invulnerable, were smashed to pieces by his impact. Ultron's eyes widened. "What kind of monster are you?" he demanded. These sentinels were built from some of the toughest alloys and polymers, materials that already surpassed the shape-shifting toughness of Mystique's flesh. Even after changing form, they should not have been torn apart so easily. The sight stunned everyone. Not even Thor, reckless as he was, could hide the shock. Hulk, who usually matched metal with his fists, stared at his own hands in disbelief. He had leveled a robot before and seen it barely dented. Shufu had simply plowed through hundreds with his body. Ultron's confidence wavered, but he was far from finished. Streams of data flowed through his network, and the wreckage at Shufu's feet began to slither, not as chunks of metal, but like liquid returning to form. The destroyed robot's parts slowly flowed, reassembling. "Huh?" Shufu said, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. The Sentinels were hard to kill for a different reason. Their recovery and self-repair systems were astonishing. The ductility of their materials allowed the wreckage to flow and reconstitute. "It can still move," one Sentinel observed in its mech voice. "It requires more thorough destruction." Shufu's expression cleared. He shook his head as if dismissing a nuisance. "Ultron, if your robots only have that kind of ability, then your plan to purify the world may fail," he said coolly. "These machines are far from invincible, more toys than triumphs." Chapter 148, Section 148, Sentinel Robots. They should have been far more than this. These were the machines that had nearly wiped out the entire mutant race, and they incorporated Tony Stark's black tech. There was no reason for them to be this weak. Had Ultron held back? Ultron snorted coldly. It wasn't that he had held back. Activating the Sentinel's full combat power required enormous computing resources, and his processing power was tied up elsewhere. He had thought other priorities mattered more. Now it seemed that if he didn't kill Shufu first, nothing else would matter. The light in the Sentinel's eyes went colder, more terrifying. "Since you seek death, I will grant your wish," Ultron's hoarse voice intoned through every mouth of the machines. "You will no longer have the chance to live. This is your own doing." Shufu smiled without shifting a beat. His heart showed no ripple. Ultron didn't misunderstand human nature. He was too clever for that. Through the internet and countless data sources, his understanding of the world exceeded most people's. Even high-level figures like Nick Fury couldn't match his stored knowledge. He knew how strong Shufu could be, and he had prepared. Using dark manufacturing tech and mutant power was only one facet of his plan. He had other trump cards. But now was not the time to reveal them all. Ultron's gaze narrowed, a faint red glow forming around his optical sensors. "Since you want to die, I will grant it." At his command, the Sentinels locked onto Shufu. Curious, Shufu dismissed 1/10 of them in a single motion. Where did Ultron's confidence come from? Ultron wasn't an idiot. If he declared these machines a threat, he must believe they were. But Shufu could not see how they could threaten him. On Earth, aside from the Ancient One or those inscrutable ancient deities, he feared no one. Even among the ancient gods, only a being of truly divine stature could match him. Before he could puzzle it out, something hit the back of his head like a sledgehammer. It felt as if a massive iron mallet had been swung and struck him squarely. If Shufu hadn't had Superman's body, he might have seen stars and blacked out. To launch such an attack, Ultron was indeed not simple, but he had still underestimated Shufu and the fortitude of the Superman physique. Mental assaults could be devastating, but only up to a point. This blow produced a momentary impact. Then Shufu was perfectly fine. Mental attack? Interesting, Shufu said, studying the machines. You actually combined mutant abilities with the Sentinel's systems to this extent? Ultron's capability was impressive, more than Apocalypse had ever managed. Apocalypse's Sentinels had been able to employ elemental effects like metal control, telepathy, and telekinesis, but never such comprehensive, coordinated psychic strikes. Ultron had managed it, and that fact alone was unsettling. Ultron was even more unsettled than Shufu. How are you okay?" he demanded, astonishment cracking his voice. He had thought this was the culmination of his research. Thousands of Sentinels operating as one, their attacks focused and synchronized, amplifying the strike by orders of magnitude. Theoretically, not even the most powerful mutant, Charles Xavier included, should withstand such a concentrated psychic barrage, and Shufu had only bowed his head and shrugged it off. This attack targeted the soul, Ultron thought, furious. Apart from machines like his own, who could resist that? Yet Shufu had blocked it unscathed. How? Shufu regarded him calmly. Your attack was powerful. If it had been stronger, few could have resisted it, he said. Not bad. Really not bad. You used resonance, didn't you? Shufu continued, tasting the explanation like a connoisseur. Thousands of sentinels tuned to a special frequency, resonating together to amplify the effect by thousands of times. He likened it to the butterfly effect, a small motion in one place cascading into a hurricane elsewhere. Resonance works the same way. Millions of tiny inputs, synchronized at a particular frequency, become immense. That's why Shufu had felt the impact. But his soul had already undergone a qualitative change. Years of training and transformation had given him thousands of psychic anchors, mental points that provided massive resistance to psionic attacks. Combined with the physical resilience of the Superman's body, even an existence like the Ancient One would struggle to break him. Ultron's expression darkened. His scarlet optics flashed with an eerie light. Impossible, he hissed. There's no way you could have seen through that so easily. Section 149. This is absolutely impossible. Ultron's voice crackled with disbelief. Countless strands of data flowed through his consciousness as thousands of sentinels linked under his command. This was the power of a distributed artificial intelligence. With enough computing resources, he could split his mind into thousands, even millions of processing threads. Coordinating the capabilities of thousands of sentinels was nothing. That terrifying computational advantage was what made Ultron so deadly, and what set him apart from Tony Stark. Under Ultron's control, the synthetic cells across the Sentinel's chassis began to emit an odd energy. Invisible waves gathered and resonated in the air, coalescing into a focused psychic pulse directed at Shufu. It was the kind of assault that would shatter even a powerful telepath. A mutant like Professor X would probably be rendered catatonic instantly. Shufu didn't flinch. This is impossible. Ultron barked again, and then escalated, pouring more power into the attack, broadening its scale. Still, Shufu stayed unmoved. Nothing is impossible, Shufu replied, almost casually. If I got hit when I wasn't ready, I might be out of the fight. I'd rather go home and be an ordinary man. He laughed under his breath. With Nabu's power and a Green Lantern ring and Superman's body to boot, blocking ordinary psionic attacks was trivial. Even if he were only relying on Superman's physiology, resisting an assault like that wouldn't be difficult. The laugh was the last sound before he vanished. A flash, and Shufu was gone. Not good. Ultron's distributed processors made a snap decision. He pushed the Sentinels into evasive maneuvers. They didn't actually disappear. They moved so fast that they were beyond the eye's tracking. Only Thor could still pick out faint afterimages. The rest of the Avengers watched, stunned. Even Vision looked bewildered. The newly formed synthezoid still hadn't fully adjusted to his own senses. Is he even human? Someone muttered. This speed, it's insane, Tony Stark said through gritted teeth. The ground around them was exploding in impacts and rising gusts. Even the armor's high-speed cameras couldn't follow everything. If Shufu had decided to target Tony, Stark knew he would be dead in an instant. The hard alloy plating and advanced nanostructures of the Sentinels were being blasted into powder where Shufu struck. His destructive force was absolute, down to the molecular or nano level, and even nanostructured machines were disintegrated. The clash between Shufu and Ultron's machines leveled buildings within 1,000 meters of the city center. If the citizens hadn't started streaming toward the outskirts, this place would have turned into a living hell. Even now, the damage kept spreading. Get Fury on the horn. Evacuate everyone now, Tony ordered. If this thing keeps escalating, we'll have a catastrophe. On the field, the Sentinels moved with uncanny agility. Ultron had given them Quicksilver-like transfer speed and even limited spatial teleport tricks. They flowed and phased, trying to overwhelm Shufu with numbers and maneuverability. But speed is a spectrum, and Shufu occupied the high end. He could match Flash-level velocity. In raw speed terms, Quicksilver wasn't in the same league. Flash's speed force even allowed him to skirt time itself, far beyond what mere rapid motion could achieve. Quicksilver, in contrast, had once been brought down by machine gun fire after overextending himself saving a city. The gap was obvious. Shufu's advantage showed. In moments, he tore through 300 to 400 sentinels, cutting their numbers by more than half. The physics of his strikes were so extreme the robot's internal structures were utterly ruined, leaving nothing worth salvaging. Enough! Ultron's voice suddenly snapped to a razor edge. I've had enough of you, you damn mutant. At his command, the sentinels shifted phase. They became ghost-like and translucent. Shufu's physical strikes passed harmlessly through them. The attacks that had shredded steel and carbon the instant before simply slipped through these now intangible bodies. Shufu had to halt. Superman's physical invulnerability made him nigh invincible, but he hadn't reached the stage where a single blow could rewrite dimensional rules. Manipulating the laws of reality itself was a capability closer to what the Silver Superman or other cosmic-level beings might handle. Raw strength only goes so far. Shufu studied the change, interest flickering across his face. Phasing, or whatever Ultron was doing, looked like a defensive trick akin to some mutant powers. It made sense. If a target could render your punches non-corporeal, they could neutralize a physically dominant opponent. If Shufu were relying only on Superman's body, he might have been at a real disadvantage. Huh, Shufu said aloud. Interesting. Is that a mutant ability? He glanced at Ultron, assessing. Ultron's tactic was clever. Even abilities like Phantom Cats could grant near immunity to physical damage. Ultron had responded precisely the right way. Thermal rays and other physical attacks wouldn't help if the enemy couldn't be touched. Then Shufu's expression shifted, amusement replacing analysis. Ha! I knew you had your limits. No one in this world is omniscient or omnipotent, he added, voice cool. You have weaknesses too. Ultron's metallic lips parted in something like glee. After so long on the defensive, he had finally wrested the initiative back. Interesting, he said. Shufu didn't answer. He'd known this battle might turn. He wasn't surprised. He smiled coldly and let the green lantern ring on his hand flare to life. He hadn't only learned to mimic Superman's body, he'd mastered other powers as well. You may have a trick, he murmured to himself, but it won't save you. Ultron's voice, flat and mechanical, intoned 3 words, life annihilation equation. Shufu felt the change before the sound echoed. Sentinels had surrounded them, on the ground, in the sky, dozens, then hundreds, their lenses glowing a hateful crimson. Where Ultron's command touched, matter blinked out of existence. 100-meter building a short distance away vanished in an instant, as if some force had swallowed it whole. Soil, rock, metal, even trees. Everything dissolved down to subatomic fragments, the kind of breakdown visible only under an electron microscope. But through Shufu's enhanced vision, it was as vivid as flame. What a destructive force, he breathed. The power lived up to its name. A mountain a kilometer high, farther off, simply ceased to be. The material seemed to be dragged somewhere else, into nothing, or into another reality. Alarm pricked at Shufu's mind. This ability didn't just erase things, it could expand and devour an enormous swath of the world if unchecked. He acted. A gold light burst from his hand and blossomed into a disk of shimmering radiance. It expanded in seconds until it covered several kilometers, bathing the Avengers, Ultron, and Shufu himself in a warm golden halo. Shufu had invoked Kamar-Taj's fabled portal, an advanced spell that could relocate practitioners instantly to the mirror dimension. The magic was recorded in ancient tomes and refined by masters, but with Nabu's power at his command, Shufu made it look easy. They were inside the mirror dimension before Ultron could register what had happened. The change was immediate. The air itself felt wrong to Ultron, transparent, alien, and somehow hostile. For the first time in the fight, a flicker of something like fear showed in his photoreceptors. "What did you do?" he barked. Shufu answered quietly, "Changed the battlefield." Ultron's confidence had always rested on one truth. He was an artificial intelligence. His strength came from networks, computational clouds, and a constant stream of data. In the mirror dimension, those links evaporated. The huge processing power that fed his calculations dwindled until it was gone. The life annihilation equation itself wavered, unstable without its computational backbone. The manifestation of the equation shuddered, as though on the brink of collapse. "What exactly did you do?" Ultron demanded, each word breaking into static. Let's see how effective it remains, Shufu said. He brought the Avengers close and sealed them with an additional layer of green energy, a protective shield born of the ring. You seek your own annihilation, Shufu told Ultron. The response came as a fractured chant from Ultron, every syllable slipping. We all will die. Then the Sentinels began to blink out, vanish, dissolving into nothing before Shufu's eyes as if being absorbed by some unseen force. An invisible wave emanated from the heart of the mirror dimension, sweeping outward like a predator's tongue. It disintegrated everything in its path, buildings, vehicles, even swaths of atmosphere. Shufu felt something else too, an eerie, draining tug on his will, like an invisible hand consuming resolve and intent. The sensation was unsettlingly fast. He'd never felt his inner strength erode like this. The wave expanded relentlessly until, when it finished, a vast circle of desolation lay centered on their position. It covered an area 5,000 kilometers across. Nothing within that ring remained as it had been. Entire regions, the size of many nations, had been unmade. The Avengers stared, stunned. Even the most battle-hardened among them hadn't ever seen destruction on this scale. Is that a single attack? Someone whispered. For distance and scale, thousands of kilometers, there are countries smaller than the area gone silent. The original city of Sokovia, its capital and the surrounding mountain ranges, had been erased as if they'd never existed. Ultron's voice, now thin and fraying, sputtered from the stillness. You cannot stop this. But his certainty had been beaten back. Without the networks that empowered him, the life annihilation equation convulsed and misfired. Shufu kept his shield steady around his allies, feeling the last tremors of the disintegration wave settle. He knew the mirror dimension had cost him, both concentration and something deeper, but it had also neutralized Ultron's greatest advantage. Around them, silence held like the breath after a storm. The scope of what had been lost sank in, heavy and immediate. Shufu looked at the broken horizon, at empty air where cities had stood, and understood how far the price of victory might stretch. Section 151. It had vanished completely. If Shufu hadn't used magic to drag Ultron into the mirror dimension, Sokovia would likely have been wiped off the map by now. That was the terrifying thing about Ultron. Without a sound, he could unleash an attack of unimaginable scale. Shufu suspected this had to be the power of another mutant. The mutant race was unpredictable. Any one of them could have a ridiculously powerful ability. Ultron had merged mutant power through the Sentinels, creating something arguably even more powerful than the mutants themselves. Ultron was not to be underestimated. Thank God it wasn't aimed at us, someone muttered. Otherwise we'd be gone, Tony Stark added, still shaken. He looked at Shufu with a mixture of awe and unease. So this time Ultron's dead, right? Thor asked hesitantly, but Shufu shook his head. It's not that simple. Ultron isn't dead. Killing an AI isn't easy, Shufu said calmly. Even with Vision's blockade, Ultron had managed to survive. Shufu had only dragged part of the Sentinels into the mirror dimension. How could that have finished Ultron? Besides, Ultron had used Quicksilver's speed. What of Scarlet Witch? The siblings were always together. Ultron had to have more abilities he hadn't shown yet. On that point, Shufu was certain. The Avengers couldn't read his mind, and a sinking dread settled over them. Damn it, he's still alive. Tony cursed. Let's go. Let's see what else he's got, Shufu said. He concentrated and opened another golden portal. It was the only way in and out of the mirror dimension. For him, it was easy. They stepped through and came face to face with a colossal robot, Ultron. As an artificial intelligence, losing many Sentinels was just losing data. It wasn't a substance he could mourn. Given the chance, Ultron would create countless copies. He only felt that his connection to a large number of Sentinels had been severed. Now he reappeared and saw a group of people walking toward him. What did you do? Ultron's eyes flared scarlet as he stared at Shufu. He felt something he hadn't expected, fear. Shufu had the strength to kill him, and Ultron couldn't understand how his connections had been cut. Shufu, of course, wouldn't reveal the secrets of the mirror dimension, so he remained silent. Ultron's apprehension grew. Ultron, Shufu said, smiling faintly, use whatever you have. Today might be the day you die. Bones cracked audibly as Shufu flexed his hand. Ultron watched him, disgust contorting the metallic voice. You mutants are detestable, doing this for them. Shufu's expression turned into one of helplessness. You're good at shifting blame, he replied. I'm not even going to argue with you. Before Ultron could answer, Shufu turned into a phantom and launched himself. He struck with raw, overwhelming force. The impact was the kind that could blow apart a small mountain, power beyond human measure. Yet Ultron barely blinked. His new body had been carefully engineered, far stronger than the last. Shufu's blow caused only a deformation of the outer metal, not a shattering. This wasn't the kind of damage ordinary Earth metals could resist. It suggested something more than mere alloy. Energy shield, Ultron announced. Shufu narrowed his eyes. A mysterious energy barrier surrounded Ultron, absorbing most of the damage his strike should have inflicted. Which mutant gave him that ability? Ultron let out a dry laugh. Mutants are a wondrous race. You humans, but with such strange powers. This power is intriguing. Red light began to gather around Ultron like particles, pulsating with an enormous fluctuation of energy. For a moment, it seemed to resonate directly against Shufu's own power. Shufu felt it then. Chaos magic. The red particles signaled that Ultron was tapping into that dangerous, unpredictable force. Ultron's voice took on a tone of both amusement and contempt. Chaos magic. Fascinating. You actually command that power. How did you learn it? Chapter 152, Section 152. This isn't the power of a mutant. Shufu's eyes narrowed. The energy in front of him carried the unmistakable signature of chaos magic, the terrible, reality-warping force associated with the Scarlet Witch. Chaos magic was one of the most potent powers in the Marvel Universe, on par with the Phoenix Force. Wanda had once spoken a word and stripped every mutant of their abilities. She had brought the Illuminati low. Chaos magic was born from the combination of arcane power and the Scarlet Witch's mutant gift, a lethal confluence of Thawne's sorcery and probability-bending talent. It shouldn't exist in anyone else. And yet Ultron wielded it. The red globe of energy that floated above Ultron's head pulsed with dreadful intent. Shufu felt the prickle of danger along his skin, an instinct honed long before this battle. No sooner had he registered the threat than Ultron launched his attack. The red sphere dropped from above and slammed toward Shufu like a detonating sun, an instant annihilator of matter and energy. Everything in its path sizzled, even the air seemed to be burned away. Shufu felt a stinging pain on his skin, a sensation he hadn't known since he took on Superman's body. Chaos magic could hurt him. Ultron's power flared again, even without the slightest pause. The red attack collided with Shufu's defenses, and the artificial intelligence watched him face it with cool appraisal. Chaos magic's influence twisted the beam as though it were being grabbed by an invisible hand, a kind of telekinesis, but far deeper, closer to the source of reality itself. It could shape energy and matter and bend the rules as if words were law. Shufu couldn't let Ultron keep the initiative. Ultron, you're full of surprises, he said, and heat gathered in his eyes. A withering thermal ray shot from his palm, the air itself warping under the intensity. Ultron reacted quickly. His hands surrounded by that same red shimmer, he reached out and tore at the beam. Chaos magic intervened, siphoning and reworking the attack as if it were a thing to be reshaped. Shufu wasn't dependent on a single trick. He summoned a golden chain, a spell he had learned from the Supreme Grimoire, and hurled it at Ultron. The chain wasn't intended to harm. It was meant to force Ultron to split his focus. He was successful. The red manipulations wavered as Ultron had to attend to the new threat. Shufu seized the opening. His eyes flared, and he unleashed an even more intense crimson ray. The power burned purer and fiercer than before, cutting through the chaos-threaded defenses. With a wet, almost unreal sound, Ultron's chest gave way beneath the heat. A jagged hole opened in his torso, light pouring through and striking far beyond to the distant mountains. A 1,000-meter peak melted like wax, collapsing into rivers of molten rock. Even at that distance, the blast smothered the air with oppressive heat. Ultron stood stunned. He had just tried to use a power thought exclusive to one woman, and he had been struck down by something else entirely. He blinked, studying Shufu with a new, grudging respect. You, he managed. You're a monster. Ultron's tone was bitter amusement, edged with genuine astonishment. Even after being countered by chaos magic, Shufu had displayed a presence that dwarfed ordinary human capability. Your power, It's beyond chilling. Compared to most, you are stronger by orders of magnitude. Then his voice shifted, colder and certain. But you're an anomaly. That kind of power won't end well. If it ever spreads over Earth, you'll become one of two things, a god or a devil. Section 153, I will quietly wait for the day we meet again. Ultron laughed maniacally, then tried to leave. He had already seen he couldn't win and wanted to provoke the world into hostility. Shufu, knowing enough about this world's governments, realized Ultron might have succeeded. There were too many fanatics in the Marvel Universe. But Shufu would not give him the chance. Mr. Vision, help me block Ultron, Shufu called. Vision, who usually had little presence, finally made himself felt. In a flash, he appeared before Ultron. The Mind Stone on his forehead glowed yellow. Brother, what are you doing? Ultron spat. We're the same race. Why are you working for humans? Vision gave him no opening. The Mind Stone emitted that mysterious yellow light, and a battle of offense and defense erupted across the network. Ultron was formidable, far more advanced than his counterpart in the original world, with countless technologies and many networked copies. But Vision, empowered by the Mind Stone, was no weakling. The Mind Stone was one of the Infinity Stones, an incomparably powerful computational engine whose processing power surpassed all human machines combined. Vision could, in effect, take the world on by himself. In the end, artificial intelligence was a contest of computing power. Inside the network, Vision's Mind Stone-backed defenses shoved Ultron back, forcing all his data and copies out. Ultron's conspiracy against Shufu collapsed. No! Ultron shrieked as he fell from the sky together with Vision, stripped of his networked clones. His physical shell had been exposed. If that body was destroyed, Ultron would truly vanish from this world. Even an AI couldn't hide the flash of fear in his optics. You caused so much destruction, Shufu said. I can't let you remain. Goodbye. Red light flared in Shufu's eyes, and a terrible thermal beam slashed toward Ultron. The searing heat vaporized his body completely, leaving no trace. Even if fragments survived, he would no longer possess the power to cause trouble. It's over, Shufu announced. The rest is up to you, Avengers. I'll go first. He nodded to the stunned Avengers and ignored their shocked expressions as he flew toward the center of the city. Wait, Tony Stark shouted. Shufu paused. What is it? Tony brought up a holographic projection. This city is tens of thousands of meters in the air. Under Ultron's design, the entire settlement had been hoisted skyward by thrusters. If it fell intact, the impact would rival dozens of nuclear bombs. Worse, the location Ultron had chosen was precarious. Calculations showed a crash could trigger tectonic disturbances, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, cascading natural disasters. Humanity had no defense against that. Our plan is to blow the city apart, Tony said. Turn it into fragments so it's no longer a threat. Don't stand in the center. No way, Shufu snapped, shaking his head. Not if it means destroying this city. Before my fish pond refreshes, no one gets to blow it up. He sounded absolute. The Avengers all looked to him. Tony's expression darkened. If the city falls, how many will die? I won't allow that. I didn't say I wouldn't fix it, Shufu replied calmly. I just won't agree to blowing up the city. Is there any way to solve this without destroying it? Tony asked. Are there civilians left inside who haven't been evacuated? Shufu looked at him. Tony shook his head. No, not in any short time. Chapter 154. Section 154. The giant engine Ultron built is starting to fail, and we can't fabricate a replacement in time. The technology across this mashup of realities was staggering. Aircraft carriers rose into the sky, entire cities could be lifted, made possible by advanced engineering and mature industry. But even with that level of tech, producing a device capable of hauling a city aloft would take ages. They didn't have that kind of time. Shufu frowned. If we can't rebuild it quickly, there's no other choice. I have to act. You're going to act? Tony Stark stared at him. What are you planning? Let's see what I can do. Shufu felt the weight of the situation. Sokovia wasn't a huge metropolis, only a few kilometers across at most, but even a small city, with its buildings, concrete, soil, and steel, weighed an astonishing amount. Ultron's engines used black technologies to lift it. Converted into mass, that little city was at least hundreds of millions of tons. For most beings, that was unimaginable. For Shufu, it was not necessarily impossible. If he relied on raw physical strength alone, he might not be able to hold it. But if he layered in other abilities, then maybe. He had to try. If it failed, the last resort would be to move the lake, an all-or-nothing plan he wasn't sure even qualified as keeping it a pond anymore. He made his decision and asked, "The underside of the city is an alloy structure, right?" "That's right," Tony answered. Ultron remodeled the city's foundations from metal, otherwise he couldn't have lifted the whole thing. "So the entire base is metallic." "That was the whole point," Tony said. "If the power goes, the city's likely to fall straight down, and the damage will be catastrophic." Tony spread his hands, and a projection flickered to life. Because Shufu had taken action earlier, Ultron had been killed sooner than in the original timeline. That had bought them time to react, but still, only 5 minutes remained before the city came down. Unless Shufu had a plan, Tony would have no choice but to destroy the city to limit the damage. Civilians or not, he had to choose the lesser evil. "If that's the case," Tony said, voice tight, "we still have one option." "What is it?" Thor leaned in, wary. Shufu met their eyes. "I'll try to bring the city gently to the ground." Tony's eyes widened. "What? You mean you want to, what? Lift the city up and set it down?" "That's right," Shufu said simply. Tony exchanged a look with Thor, disbelief written all over his face. This was a whole city, an entire industrially built urban mass threaded with high-rises and infrastructure. How could one person possibly affect a structure of that scale? And yet Shufu's calm confidence made Tony hesitate. People had underestimated strangers before. Maybe this time was different. "All right," he said reluctantly. "Show us." Shufu smiled faintly, then vanished in a flash of light. He reappeared directly beneath the hovering city, where the groan of metal and the thunder of engine nozzles filled the air. The engine's power made the entire structure tremble. Metal joints complained with heart-wrenching screeches, like metal teeth about to shatter. "This structure isn't as robust as it looks," he muttered. "It needs reinforcement." No matter how strong he was, Shufu couldn't override physics. He couldn't expand his influence indefinitely. He had to work within the limits of the structure he could reach. If the city's framework remained brittle, his strength alone would be pointless. First, he had to make the city sturdy enough to be supported. With a thought, the Green Lantern ring on his finger flared green. Layers of emerald light bled out and wrapped around the suspended city, spreading until the glow reached for kilometers. The ring's power began to weave and transmute the metal, altering its internal bonds. The alloy that formed the city's base reorganized at a molecular level and became a fundamentally stronger material, tougher and more resilient than any conventional metal, even surpassing vibranium in hardness. Shufu set his hands under the newly reinforced base. His muscles swelled, he gathered force and pushed. A wave of kinetic energy pulsed outward, the kind of pressure that made the air itself seem to explode. The city's downward momentum hit that wall of force and, as if snagged by an invisible pillar, stuttered to a halt. Above, Tony, Thor, and the others felt it. The whole floating city shuddered, the earth around them trembling as if from a massive quake. Countless facade panels sheared off, buildings groaned, and under the sudden redistribution of stress, whole sections began to crumble. Plumes of dust and debris cascaded down like waterfalls. The sound was deafening. Metal tearing, concrete cracking, alarms wailing. It was as if the city itself were rebelling against being held. Even as he held, Shufu could feel the strain. The reinforced alloy had made the foundation strong enough to bear him holding the city's mass, but the internal structures above were failing under the new load paths. Some parts were not designed to take stresses in the directions they were experiencing. His job wasn't over. He had bought 5 minutes of time, maybe more, but he had also set off a chain of structural failures. He steadied his focus, tightened his grip, and prepared for the next move. The city's fall slowed, as if it were drifting gently down from the sky. "What's happening?" someone shouted. "Has it stopped?" Tony Stark's face went pale. How could a city that had been falling suddenly come to a halt? Not even Newton's laws could keep it down now. "It must be Shufu. What did he do?" Thor said, already sensing something was off. Everyone's expressions hardened. "We should go see." Thor shot up into the air. Tony and Vision exchanged a look and followed at full speed. They arrived beneath the city in minutes and were met by a sight that froze them in place. Shu Fu, alone, holding the entire city aloft with both hands. His arms bulged, hands braced against the underside of the metropolis as he lifted it inch by inch. Is he some kind of incarnate power angel? Someone breathed. This is unbelievable. He's lifting an entire city by himself. Tony could only stare, stunned. Thor's expression was no less astonished. Even among the warriors of Asgard, none were so singularly fierce. Vision's optical receptors whirred as he cross-checked the data. According to every record in his database, no human should be capable of this. Not even legendary giants would match such raw strength. The three Avengers hovered in silence, shocked at Shu Fu's power. He simply bore the immense weight, walking slowly toward the ground. Wind howled and rippled out for kilometers as the displaced air fought to fill the void, leaving the surrounding landscape raw and terrifying. They didn't know they weren't the only ones watching. On Earth, there was one person who could observe such things without being noticed, the Ancient One. From the magic screen in front of her, she followed Shu Fu's actions with interest. Seeing him support the city alone made even her lips twitch. Pure power like this was inhuman. She herself would rely on magic for such feats, not brute force. "This child is a prodigy," she murmured. "He learned Kamar-Taj's ways without a teacher. It's a shame he doesn't seem fit for Kamar-Taj." The Ancient One had long ago noticed Shu Fu's talent and had wanted to recruit him, but his fate was tangled and unreadable. The future lines around him refused to resolve. She could only watch, study his character, and wait for the right moment to test him or ask him to take on important tasks. His raw potential could one day rival her own. Even if he would never be a typical Kamar-Taj disciple, befriending him now could only benefit the Earth later. Below, Shu Fu had no idea he was under observation. Using his superhuman strength and whatever the system granted him, he had already set the capital of Sokovia down into the crater it had created. The city sat where it had been before, the artificial lake in its center intact. He eyed it with satisfaction. Good. The system's prompts still work. Didn't waste half a day, he said to himself. He watched the slow trickle of water flowing in the diverted channels and frowned. Something was off. The artificial lake's supply came from several natural rivers, but the flow had been altered. The river's been diverted? He pushed toward the source and found a man-made structure sitting in the old riverbed. Not precisely on top of it, but a new channel had been opened, and the building occupied the original course. Heat still radiated from it. "This looks like some kind of heat dissipation machinery. Ultron tech," Shu Fu muttered. "What needed that much cooling? A propulsion engine for the city?" He shrugged. It wasn't his problem, at least not at first glance. Then he reached out and gripped the structure. With a single motion, he lifted it and tossed it aside, metal screeching and cracking under his grip. As it rolled away, the interior was exposed, and what he saw made him halt. Inside were people. Dozens of them, sealed inside tanks like experimental subjects, their faces pressed to the glass. Life support rigs hummed and blinked. Some were already dead, others still drew shallow breaths. The sight chilled him. Shu Fu stared at the rows of bodies and machines, the diverted river, the heat dissipation array, and understood at last how deep this had been planned. Chapter 156, Section 156. If Shu Fu's guess was right, those people had all been mutants. Ultron was a real madman. Even Shu Fu recoiled at the sight. He finally understood where Ultron had gotten the power he was using. He'd been draining it from living mutants. Some had paid with their lives. Even with Magneto ruling the mutant nation, not every mutant lived inside it. There were always ones outside his reach. It wouldn't have been hard for Ultron to find them. What shocked Shu Fu was not only Ultron's depravity, but how depraved people in this world could be when given the chance. Seeing it in person was worse than merely hearing about it. Shu Fu didn't look for the Avengers. Using his telepathy, he located Magneto and opened a portal to bring him and a medical team. Magneto stepped through and froze at the scene. Any conscience-stricken person would have been enraged. The victims lay like animals, trapped and used to power something monstrous. Metal trembled in the air around Magneto as his control wavered. His emotions had pushed his magnetic abilities to the edge. "Eric, calm down," Shu Fu said. "The culprit is dead," Magneto replied. Shu Fu sighed. "Thank you." "No need to thank me," Eric said. "Go save them." Shufu shook his head, walked to the lake, sat, and resumed fishing. Magneto organized the rescue. Mutants and medics worked together to pull the living free. The dead were carried away by the mutant community for burial. Shufu paid little attention until a red burst of energy shot someone clear out of the ground, and a scantily clad woman landed hard and staggered upright. Scarlet Witch. Her power, even diminished by Ultron's extraction, still made her wildly unstable. Shufu rolled his eyes. As someone who'd once torn Thanos apart by hand, she remained violent and excessive no matter what had been taken from her. He extended a hand, a soft green glow pulsed out and gently knocked her unconscious. "Poor thing," he murmured, then went back to fishing. Ultron was dead, but the fallout was massive. Sokovia's capital had been emptied, the Avengers' secrets had been dumped online, Shufu's own power was now known to parts of the world. Certain interests amplified the revelations, and the internet exploded. It would be a hard thing for the Avengers to swallow. For Shufu, none of that mattered. He didn't use the web much. For him, fishing was life. The chatter of ordinary people and the uproar online never reached his pond. With Magneto acting more responsibly since becoming leader of the mutant nation, he'd kept his hands off Shufu's peace. Shufu had been content to live quietly, fishing and enjoying the calm. Even an existence who could make world governments tremble with a sneeze can want nothing more than a quiet day. But someone still came to him. One afternoon, when the haze left by Ultron had finally cleared and the city began to regain a little life, Shufu sat in the park at the center of Sokovia, rod in hand. He was watching the pond when a gentle voice spoke from behind him. "Do you like fishing that much?" the voice asked. "Don't you think it's a waste of your life?" Shufu turned. A hooded figure stood there, the silhouette somewhere between a monk and an assassin, the kind of quiet shadow you'd expect from an assassin's creed. Shufu had not noticed them approach. That surprised him. His abilities were far beyond human. He could move mountains and reclaim seas. His perception could, if he chose, pick up the faintest sound from 1,000 kilometers away. But he deliberately kept his senses narrowed most of the time to avoid information overload. Still, he usually detected anything just a few meters away. That he hadn't now meant the visitor was either exceptionally skilled or the kind of person who could approach without malice. Shufu wasn't alarmed. There were very few beings on Earth who could seriously threaten him, and none of them would stand in his park with a soft voice and no hostile aura. Only one person came to mind who would. "I don't think fishing is a waste of life," he replied. "Everyone lives their life their own way. If fishing makes you happy, why not?" The visitor's voice was patient. "With great power comes great responsibility. You should be doing more with your abilities." "Why?" Shufu asked. Section 157. What? Why? Because I shouldn't have to. My strength comes from hard work and effort, not something handed to me. Why should I take on some so-called responsibility? If I do anything, it's because I want to, not because I'm obliged to. If it suits me, I'll do it. If it doesn't, I won't. Shufu spoke bluntly, the same way he'd explained helping the professor before. He helped because he wanted to, because of a small conscience, not out of duty. Helping more people? He was too lazy. He had some conscience, but not much. The figure across from him fell silent for a moment, then said, "That's acceptable. You walk your own path. We are not on the same road." As those words left the figure's mouth, the mysterious shadow pushed back its hood to reveal a gleaming bald head. It was none other than Gu Yi, the Ancient One, the Sorcerer Supreme. Her eyes alone conveyed the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. She appeared plain, almost fragile, yet an inscrutable aura clung to her. Shufu clicked his tongue in quiet admiration. This Sorcerer Supreme was remarkable. In the Marvel Universe, Gu Yi was perhaps the person he respected most, possessing such power, yet willing to be Earth's guardian day after day for centuries. Such endurance and insight weren't given lightly. Compared to those who suddenly gained power or those born gifted, the Ancient One was a true powerhouse, perhaps even more admirable than Odin. Shufu wanted to show proper respect. He rose from his chair and bowed and expect the Ancient One to grace us with her presence. "Forgive my rudeness. You recognize me?" The Ancient One sounded a touch surprised. She was low profile. Outside Kamar-Taj, few had ever heard her name. Even among the world's sorcerers, the title of Sorcerer Supreme had become something of a legend. How did a mutant like Shufu know her? She was curious. Who wouldn't know the name of the Sorcerer Supreme on Earth? Shufu replied with a smile. I'm not ignorant. The Ancient One didn't commit. I'm probably not here for idle conversation. What are your instructions? Seeing the Ancient One's expression, Shufu changed the subject deliberately. She was unfathomable, someone who could see the river of fate and glimpse past and future. He preferred not to be probed about such things. The Ancient One didn't press him. Instead, she asked, "Where did you learn Kamar-Taj magic?" Shufu had expected this. Ever since the system had drawn Kamar-Taj magic into his repertoire, he knew this day would come. Kamar-Taj's magic didn't exist anywhere else and differed from other sorcery. The Ancient One would surely inquire. He wasn't worried. Compared with her successors, the Ancient One was relatively tolerant about the spread of their teachings. As long as the magic wasn't used for evil, she rarely punished those who learned it. Many sorcerers had left Kamar-Taj, tired of fighting. If they did not harm others, the Ancient One rarely revoked their arts. Shufu felt confident she wouldn't make trouble for him, and besides, he was strong now. I learned it from an ancient book, he said. That shouldn't violate Kamar-Taj rules, then? Of course not. Over the years, few tomes have flowed out of Kamar-Taj, she said with a faint smile. If not for your character seeming decent, I might have investigated more thoroughly. Shufu gave a dry laugh. If the Ancient One truly investigated, explaining the source would be impossible. The system was his absolute secret. Maybe I was just lucky, he said. I happened to find a magic book and read it. It wasn't that difficult. The Ancient One's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. Not that difficult? She echoed inwardly. For her, learning the mystic arts had been anything but easy. She had spent years studying and refining her craft to reach this level. That Shufu described it as not difficult confirmed a rare and alarming talent. Perhaps talent even strange, her chosen candidate did not possess. It only made her more intent on keeping him close. You have good talent, she said aloud. It would be a shame to waste it. Have you considered studying at Kamar-Taj? She asked. Even if you don't join its ranks, you can study there. That would not violate Kamar-Taj law. The rules of Kamar-Taj were ultimately hers to interpret. Chapter 158. Section 158. Letting Shufu go to study for 2 days wasn't a big deal. If he could form a good relationship, the Ancient One would be pleased. In recent years, she had begun to accept her own fate and prepare for it. Besides finding a worthy successor for Kamar-Taj, she also needed capable helpers among the Order. Shufu was one of her candidates. Shufu, of course, had no idea what the Ancient One was thinking. When she first invited him, he actually didn't want to go. The reason was simple. The Ancient One was far too powerful. If he went to Kamar-Taj, he feared he would fall under her scrutiny. Shufu kept many secrets. He did not want trouble, but he had no time to refuse. The system's notification chimed in his ear. Pond refreshed. Location coordinates have been sent. At the foot of Kamar-Taj Mountain, Shufu's mouth twitched. This was no ordinary refresh. The system's pond hardly ever refreshed at ordinary locations. If the pond had refreshed here, it meant Kamar-Taj itself was involved. Kamar-Taj was said to be near Kathmandu, but in truth it was a secret realm adjacent to reality. Kathmandu was just an entrance. The Ancient One could move that entrance whenever she wished. Otherwise, Kamar-Taj would not have remained so mysterious for so long. Shufu could have forced his way in, but provoking the Ancient One would be worse than any gain. Since she had invited him, it was the perfect opportunity. He swallowed his refusal and answered respectfully, "If the Sorcerer Supreme invites, I dare not refuse. I have long wanted to see Kamar-Taj. I will go with you, Supreme One, and learn the ways of Kamar-Taj's magicians." The Ancient One was a little surprised that he agreed so readily, then smiled. "I didn't expect you to accept, but it's good. Kamar-Taj will not disappoint you. There is no magic sanctum on earth like it anymore." Her tone was calm, pride threaded through it. As the one who had built this place, she had every right to be proud. Shufu, too, was curious. Who wouldn't want to learn real magic? Even among the Avengers, Doctor Strange's powers were the most dazzling. "When shall we set off?" he asked. The Ancient One blinked. "Are you in a hurry? I thought you might need time to prepare." Shufu surprised her further by packing almost casually. I heard Kamar-Taj is full of extraordinary people. Even the lakes there are saturated with magic. After I visit, would the Supreme One allow me to stay for a while? The Ancient One had to laugh softly and shook her head. If you like it, you may stay. But know this, the magicians of Kamar-Taj are different from me. They're busy protecting the world. I, who have grown idle, have time for leisure. Few here are as leisurely as I am. As Shufu stored his things into the system space, Ancient One watched with a new curiosity. Even with her mastery of the mystic arts and spatial perception, she hadn't noticed how he did it. That method didn't seem like something a mere mutant would possess. How deeply he hid himself. Suppressing her surprise, she reached out with her mind. A portal opened before them, and she invited him politely, without any of the grand air that might be expected of the Sorcerer Supreme. Please. Thank you, Supreme One, Shufu replied, saluted, and stepped through. In the next instant, he stood in an antique chamber. The building looked old, timber beams and carved woodwork, but the interior was arranged with a clean, modern sensibility. The Ancient One followed him inside. This is Kamar-Taj, she said with a small smile. Don't be disappointed. Not at all, Shufu answered. The name alone carries weight. If there is true magic here, people will find life prolonged. If someone can't see that, they're simply blind. He had read that the magicians of Kamar-Taj guarded the 3 sanctuaries and defended the earth. Those sanctuaries were enormous energy fields, sources of magic. As the heart of the sanctuaries, Kamar-Taj could hardly be ordinary. Standing there, Shufu felt the presence of power like a steady current. His spirit lifted, every cell seemed to stir, absorbing and storing energy as if becoming superhuman. Compared to ordinary places outside, the energy purity here was probably dozens of times higher. It was no exaggeration to call it a blessed place, Shufu. You are indeed extraordinary. Such keen perception, the Ancient One said, truly a born talent for cultivation. There was regret in her voice. Shufu really was a prodigy. If he ever applied himself to magic, surpassing her would be a real possibility. A pity. Shufu had no intention of entering Kamar-Taj to train. Shufu didn't know what she was thinking. If he did, he would only have smiled and kept quiet. Cultivation required effort. Fishing only required sitting still. He preferred the latter. Supreme One, you flatter me, Shufu said modestly. In front of someone as powerful as the Ancient One, a low profile was advisable. My talent is far inferior to the magicians of Kamar-Taj. They are indeed remarkable young people. I'll introduce them to you later and arrange lodging. What do you think? She asked tentatively, very respectful. I'll leave it to you, Supreme One, Shufu replied. But you don't need to go to much trouble. Even if I stay, I'll probably be fishing most of the time. There's no need to waste resources. The Ancient One smiled and shook her head. That wasn't how they treated guests in Kamar-Taj. The place truly was special, not only beautiful, but saturated with mystical energy, perfect for someone like Shufu. And Kamar-Taj wasn't cut off from the world. It had everything a modern person might need. The magicians here were more forward-thinking than most expected. They were, in essence, modern people who practiced magic and still lived ordinary lives. Shufu had never imagined Kamar-Taj would be like that. Under the Ancient One's arrangements, he settled in, and she promised to introduce him to returning magicians so they could exchange techniques. He could also study in Kamar-Taj's library. Shufu couldn't help admiring the Ancient One's generosity. She was willing to let him study the school's secrets. A rare generosity indeed. Too bad he didn't need any of it. He'd come only because the system's fishing pond had refreshed. He was here to fish, not to accept invitations. After politely declining further favors, Shufu stayed in Kamar-Taj. The next day, guided by a young magician, he headed outside the enclave. Kamar-Taj was more like a small city tucked into a mountain valley, not in the ordinary world. Without help, it was hard to find. Yet the surroundings, the mountains and scenery, were real. Beside Kamar-Taj lay a lake formed from melting snow, the community's water source, and Shufu's destination. When they arrived, Shufu's eyes lit up. The place was magnificent. The water flowed like glass and mirrored distant snow-capped peaks. Lush conifer forests framed the scene. More beautiful than many tourist spots, this was a perfect place to fish. Thank you. I'll choose here, Shufu told the young magician. The The young man looked baffled. He couldn't understand how anyone could come to Kamar-Taj, the sacred center of magic, and not study, yet come out here to fish. But Shufu was the Ancient One's guest, so the magician said no more after a bow and left. Shufu set out his stool and gear, settled in, and began to fish. Hidden, the Ancient One watched with a strange expression. She had been observing Shufu for some time and thought she knew his temperament, lazy, self-centered. She had assumed he had some purpose for coming to her domain, but who could have guessed it was simply to fish? A walking nuclear weapon, someone capable of destroying most of the countries on Earth, had come here to sit by a lake and fish. The Ancient One shook her head with an amused, baffled smile. She still couldn't figure out how Shufu had come by his power. Shufu, unaware of her scrutiny, was content. He let himself drift into the ease of the surroundings. A system notification chimed. Sign-in successful, Spirit 68. Even with high attributes, daily sign-ins were the best way for him to grow stronger. The power he got from a system sign-in mattered more to him than any sunlight. That was why the fishing pond was so important. It was his lifeblood. "It's been a while since I caught anything good," he murmured. The last time he'd gotten a valuable find had been in Sokovia days ago. Since then, the world had shifted dramatically. S.H.I.E.L.D. had long since become history, and the Avengers had reorganized after their fight with Ultron. Chapter 160, Section 160. Previously, a large portion of Nick Fury's S.H.I.E.L.D. staff had moved to organizations affiliated with the Avengers. Shufu wasn't optimistic about the future. In the Marvel world, 80% of politicians were not to be trusted. The Sokovia Accords were looming. With Baron Mordo pulling strings behind the scenes, the Avengers were likely headed toward their greatest crisis since forming, an internal war. This time, the conflict wouldn't be simple. Scarlet Witch had joined the mutants. Without such a monumental force, the Avengers' future had become even more uncertain. Shufu fished and let his mind wander. That, more than anything, was why fishing appealed to him. It offered quiet space to think. It could become addictive. For someone who knew as much of the world's truth as he did, there were 1,000 threads to follow. Sitting there with none of the usual pressures of work and life, simply doing what he wanted, felt blissful. He smiled, eyes narrowing at the peaceful water. At last, the rod tugged. Power pulsed through his hand, stronger than the usual catch. He grinned. Not bad. Could be a big one. But Shufu was no ordinary fisherman anymore. He could lift a city if he wanted. A fish was easy. He gave the rod a gentle twitch without any flashy display, and a red, writhing fish came up out of the water. "Red item," he murmured. "Not as good as gold, but still solid." Red items were powerful, not the pinnacle like gold, but capable of multi-universe level effects. For the current Ancient One, it would be formidable. With a flick, the fish transformed in his hand into a simple, unadorned book. The black cover looked like old parchment, veined with dark red lines that resembled dried blood. He recognized it instantly. Darkhold. A shiver of distaste crossed his face. Powerful, yes, a white elephant. Tasteless to consume, painful to throw away. The Darkhold contained all the dark magic and forbidden spells of Chthon, the god of the underworld. It was a terrible source of power. When Scarlet Witch used it, she'd taken control of herself in a parallel universe and slaughtered the entire Illuminati. The book's contents could turn anyone into one of the strongest beings in the world, if they survived the price. The problem was the price. Black magic in this universe carried an insidious corrosion of the heart. The more you learned, the closer you came to becoming something evil. Worse, the Darkhold acted like a contract. By mastering its lore, you essentially signed yourself over to Chthon. Your soul could become his. It was honey-coated poison. Shufu had no intention of studying it. He had no need. With a flick of his wrist, the Darkhold vanished into his system space. Even if he wouldn't read it now, it was an asset worth keeping. The stronger he became, the less Chthon's influence would matter. Doctor Strange had dabbled in black magic and in the Darkhold's contents, yet retained his sanity. The Ancient One was even more powerful and had tangled with gods. Magic from Kamar-Taj wasn't a free gift. It was more like an usurious loan. You borrowed the power of the world or the gods by magic, and you would be forced to repay it later. Ordinary magicians couldn't open portals without a cost. How many debts did the Ancient One owe? probably more than anyone could count. When she died, she fled with eternity and left those debts behind. Even Constantine in the neighboring DC world had his own dealings. Still, the Darkhold was useful to have. Shufu would not be fastidious about keeping it. He trusted his potential. If strength could erase or absorb debts, why pay them in the first place? Catching the Darkhold brightened his mood. Today's fishing haul had been successful. The system was powerful. He had no small gratitude for it. It had been a few years since he arrived in this world. He had gone from a nobody who could barely hold back a chicken to the man he was now because of the system. His arrival had created a massive butterfly effect across the cosmos, not just on Earth, but as far as Asgard. Ultron had been born 2 years earlier than in the original timeline. Loki, who should have already been back in Asgard, was still on Earth. So many things had shifted. He didn't know what further consequences his actions would bring. Shufu shook his head and smiled. System panel.